He was one of the great geniuses of the movies. He was the master of suspense, romance, and the macabre. He was the remarkable Alfred Hitchcock. This is Jimmy Stewart, and I want to tell you about a very special event. The return of 5 Hitchcock pictures unseen for more than a decade. 5 films from Hitch's private collection. I hope you'll join me in welcoming back Vertigo, The Man Who Knew Too Much, Rope, The Trouble with Harry, and Rear Window. Experience the genius of Alfred Hitchcock.
Well, that was Jimmy Stewart in a promotional trailer praising the master, Alfred Hitchcock. And the occasion for the praise is the reissue of 5 of Hitchcock's best films. And Alfred Hitchcock is the subject of this special sneak previews. I'm Neil Gabler.
And I'm Jeffrey Lyons. These 5 Hitchcock movies were held out of general release for years, but they were recently purchased from the Hitchcock estate by Universal Pictures, and they're now in gradual nationwide re-release. Now, on this special edition of Sneak Previews, we'll look at the 5 movies: Vertigo, Rear Window, The Man Who Knew Too Much, The Trouble with Harry, and Rope. And we'll also have a special interview with one of Hitchcock's favorite stars, Jimmy Stewart, who starred in 4 of these movies.
Well, the first film, The Man Who Knew Too Much, which was a 1956 remake of an earlier Hitchcock film, has just about every ingredient you associate with a Hitchcock movie. It stars Jimmy Stewart and Doris Day as 2 American tourists vacationing in Morocco. And as is often the case at the beginning of a Hitchcock film, everything seems perfectly normal. But one of Hitchcock's themes is that something dangerous brews beneath even the calmest surface, as you can see in this scene from The Man Who Knew Too Much. After that little encounter, Stewart and Day find that they're now involved in a plot to assassinate a prime minister. And to prevent them from telling the police, the assassins kidnap their son. In this scene, which is one of Hitchcock's most famous, Day and Stewart are at the Albert Symphony Hall in London, where the assassination is scheduled to take place. Well, both of these scenes from The Man Who Knew Too Much demonstrate how something ordinary, the marketplace and the symphony, can often conceal something evil, murder. And the Hitchcock hero operates on the same sort of principle. Like Jimmy Stewart here, the hero is someone who's relatively complacent, an ordinary guy who's never really experienced anything unusual in his life. But just about the first thing that happens to him in a Hitchcock film is that his complacency gets tested. And he discovers that underneath his calm surface, he's not quite as normal as he thinks he is.
Here you see the basic element for a Hitchcock movie, Neil. You see the Hitchcock character. Every man, you and me, this could happen to, thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Why? Because he's the man who knew too much, the man who's learned enough to get into trouble, but not enough to get out of trouble, and we identify with him right from the start.
He thinks he's in control of his world, and yet it turns out that the world is in control of him. And I think that leads to the theme that I was talking about here. Appearances are deceiving. The world seems hospitable, but it isn't. The hero seems calm and cool and collected, but ultimately it turns out that he is not.
Right. For Hitchcock, things are seldom what they seem. Well, our next film is Rear Window, originally released in 1954. It's Hitchcock's sizzling study of the perils of voyeurism and the responsibility of those who pry into people's lives, other people's lives, in fact. Jimmy Stewart plays a news photographer, a professional voyeur. Now, he's confined to a wheelchair in his cramped New York apartment with a broken leg. He's beginning to get suspicious, however, as he sees the man across the way, played by Raymond Burr, fighting with his wife. And later, Stewart suspects the man has killed his wife. But Grace Kelly, playing Stewart's girlfriend, needs some convincing.
What is it you're looking for?
I just want to find out what's the matter with the salesman's wife, that's all. Does that make me sound like a madman?
What makes you think there's something the matter with her?
A lot of things. She's an invalid. She demands constant care. Yet neither the husband or anybody else been in to see her all day. Why?
Maybe she died.
Where's the doctor? Where's the undertaker?
She could be sleeping under sedatives. He's in there now. There's nothing to see.
What do you think? There is some. I've seen it through that window. I've seen bickering and family quarrels and mysterious trips at night, and knives and saws and ropes. And now since last evening, not a sign of the wife. All right, now you tell me where she is.
I don't know.
What's she doing? Where is she?
Maybe he's leaving his wife. I don't know. I don't care. Lots of people have knives and saws and ropes around their houses. And lots of men don't speak to their wives all day. Lots of wives nag and men hate them and trouble starts. But very, very few of them end up in murder, if that's what you're thinking.
It's pretty hard for you to keep away from that word, isn't it?
You could see all that he did, couldn't you?
Of course.
You could see because the shades were up, and he walked along the corridor in the street in the backyard.
In the backyard, fixing the flowers.
Jeff, do you think a murderer would let you see all that? That he wouldn't pull the shades down and hide behind them?
Just where he's being clever, he's being nonchalant.
Oh, and that's where you're not being clever.
He's just being nonchalant.
A murderer would never parade his crime in front of an open window.
Why not?
Why, for all you know, there's probably something a lot more sinister going on behind those windows.
Where? Oh. No comment.
Let's start from the beginning again, Jeff. Tell me everything you saw. And what you think it means.
Oh, when she did that in the theater, the audience cheered. Now, like Stewart there, we're spectators, too. Hitchcock knows all too well that we love to pry into the lives of others, to escape our own problems, and to project our desires on the screen, the way Stewart projects his desires on his neighbors across the way. Hitchcock exploits our weaknesses for prying. He knows very well it's part of why we go to the movies in the first place. And the perfect vehicle for all this prying is the murder mystery, because it compels us to pry into other people's darkest secrets. Rear Window has lost none of its devilish appeal, and it remains one of Alfred Hitchcock's masterpieces.
It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful film. Yeah. As you said, Jimmy Stewart projects his fantasies and his fears on the windows across the way, and I think that gets to the very basis of how Hitchcock entertains us. He exploits two things, our fears and our fantasies, and he does it wonderfully.
And fears, you say, we almost want there to have been a murder. This is almost horrible wish fulfillment, which is buried deep inside of us. Life is a two-way commitment, and if you make a one-way commitment and you look into somebody else's life and you see something terrible, you got to take the responsibility for that. That's what Rear Window is all about.
Because we love being scared. I think that's why we wish for it. Well, The Trouble with Harry, the third film, is from 1956, and it seems like a departure for Hitchcock. It's a comedy, and the title character, Harry, is actually a corpse who suddenly turns up in the woods outside a small New England village. Nobody seems too terribly concerned that Harry is dead, and in this scene, the local artist, played by John Forsythe, decides to use Harry as a model. And at least one thing is for sure, this model isn't going to move. The Trouble with Harry may seem unusual for Hitchcock because it's a comedy, but actually all of Hitchcock's films are full of comic touches. Naturally, Hitchcock's sense of humor is macabre. He's like the little boy who waves a dead mouse in your face and then laughs. In The Trouble with Harry, oddly enough, what we're laughing at is how casually everyone reacts to Harry's death. And once again, Hitchcock is sneaking in a little message. He's telling us that there's a little devil in the most innocent of us. And that conscience, as one character in the film says, is a lot less powerful force than desire. For Hitchcock's characters, when they're up against the wall, morals are the first thing to go.
He really loved this film. It was British humor. It was understated. It's almost a forerunner to the Hitchcock TV shows. It shows that something we're afraid to admit, that there is something, despite protestations to the contrary, funny about the most terrible thing in the world, death. And here we see it.
And as an entertainer, Hitchcock gives us a release. He gives us all of this macabre stuff, but then here's a joke. Here's a laugh to let us relax.
Yeah, there's an odd set of rhythms in the humor here. Well, now on to our next picture, which is Rope. Now, this was Hitchcock's first Technicolor film, and his first as an independent producer. Rope was made in 1948 as an experiment by Hitchcock, shooting the entire movie in 10-minute takes, all the film that a camera could hold at one time. Once Hitchcock rolled his cameras, the entire 10-minute sequence was filmed. There were no cuts, no edits. Loosely based on the Leopold and Loeb thrill murders, Rope is set in a posh New York apartment where two young men have killed a classmate with a piece of rope just for the thrill of it. Then they throw a party and even have the nerve to invite their victim's father. They've hidden the victim in the living room trunk, and here their old college professor, played by Jimmy Stewart in his very first Hitchcock role, explains his personal philosophy about society's need for murder. Of course, here he's speaking in the abstract.
Well, now, you don't really approve of murder, Rupert, if I may.
You may, and I do. Think of the problems it would solve. Unemployment, poverty, standing in line for theater tickets.
I must say I've had a perfectly dreadful time getting tickets for that new musical. What's it called? You know.
the something with what's her name? My dear Miss Atwater, careful application of the trigger finger and a pair of seats in the first row is yours for the shooting. And have you had any difficulty in getting into our Velvet Rope restaurants?
Frightful.
A very simple matter. A flick of the knife, madame. And if you'll kindly step this way, oh no, step over the head waiter's body. Thank you. And here's your table.
Rupert, you're the end.
There's a hotel clerk I could cheerfully flick a knife at.
Oh no, sorry. Knives may not be used on hotel employees. They are in the death by slow torture category.
Oh.
Along with bird lovers, small children, and tap dancers. Landlords, of course, are another matter. You seeking an apartment? Call on our Miss Sashwaite of the Blunt Instrument Department.
What a divine idea. If it suits your purpose, merely... But then we'd all be murdering each other.
Oh, no. Oh, no. After all, murder is, or should be, an art. Not one of the seven lively, perhaps, but an art, nevertheless. And as such, the privilege of committing it should be reserved for those few who are really superior individuals.
And the victims, inferior beings whose lives are unimportant anyway.
Obviously. Now, mind you, I don't hold with the extremists who feel that there should be open season for murder all year round. No. Personally, I would prefer to have cut a throat week or strangulation day.
Probably a symptom of approaching senility, but I must confess I really don't appreciate this morbid humor.
Rope is a curious intellectual parlor drama. It's more of a one-time only director's experiment than really a great movie. Now, the idea that debates about murder can actually lead to murder being committed is Rope's major theme. But Hitchcock, the master of manipulation, is challenging us here to discover just where he stands on this issue, too. Is Stewart his alter ego, talking abstractly as he does about morality? Or are the two amoral killers Hitchcock's real alter ego as he manipulates his audience like the killers are manipulating the guests at their party? Whatever the answer, Rope is still one of the oddest-looking films ever made. And from Alfred Hitchcock, an intriguing movie, if not a great one.
Certainly not a great one. But talking about Rope I think is a good opportunity to talk about the Hitchcock style, because there are no movies that look like Hitchcock's movies, and I think that's because there are no movies that have that sense of absolute control that Hitchcock exerts over his films.
And that's because he planned every single shot of every one of his movies in his head before he rolled his cameras.
And I think it's also interesting that the control that Hitchcock exerts over his movies is very much like the control that the characters in his movies try to exert over their lives.
And that affects us watching his pictures, too.
Yeah. Well, the last of Hitchcock's reissued films is Vertigo from 1956. And to me, it's the most passionate, most intense, most complex, and the best of all Hitchcock's movies. Once again, Jimmy Stewart stars, this time as a police detective who's forced to retire because of his fear of heights, vertigo. An old college chum hires Stewart to tail the friend's suicidal wife. And here, that wife, played by Kim Novak, is recovering in Stewart's apartment after a suicide attempt.
Has this ever happened to you before?
What?
Falling into San Francisco Bay.
Oh. No, it's never happened before. Oh, I've fallen into lakes out of rowboats when I was a little girl. I even fell into the river once trying to leap from one stone to another. But I've never fallen into San Francisco Bay. Have you ever before?
No. It's the first time for me, too. Here, I'll get some more coffee. Hello?
Scotty, what happened? She's not home yet.
No, she's all right. She's still here. I'll bring her home soon.
Well, what happened?
She went into the bay. Hello? Hello?
Did she hurt herself?
No, she's going to be in fine shape. There's nothing to worry about, but she doesn't know. Now, do you understand that? She doesn't know what happened.
Scotty, Madeline is 26. Carlotta Valdez committed suicide when she was 26.
Just hold on a minute, Gavin.
Later, Stewart falls madly in love with Novak, but Novak believes that she's possessed by the spirit of her great-grandmother and that she's reliving her great-grandmother's memories. Now, to break that hold on her and to convince her that she's actually visited the places she thinks she only knows through her great-grandmother's spirit, Stewart takes her to an old Spanish mission she claims she's dreamed about.
Let me go into the church. Alone.
But why? This is a really great film, I think. But what happens later is that Stewart finds someone who looks just like his dead love. And he uses this new girl, who's also played by Kim Novak, to recreate the dead woman. Again, it's the idea, as in Rope, of manipulating life. And Vertigo also restates other themes that we've talked about. Things are what they seem to be. We're all voyeurs. None of us is completely innocent. And Vertigo reinforces, what to me at least, may be the basic idea in nearly all Hitchcock's films. It's the idea that you can't just look at life like a voyeur. You've got to engage yourself with what you see. Finally, you've got to take responsibility, the way all Hitchcock's heroes do.
You're right. It's a great film. It still holds up. It's as if we're seeing it for the first time. If he never made another movie, Hitchcock would be remembered as the man who made Vertigo. He came as close to filming a dream as anyone I can think of in the history of the movies. Here we see all the levels of the subconscious of a man, pursuing the unattainable ideal, going through all the levels of his psyche, projecting himself as the voyeur onto her, trying to relive her life, to unlock the mystery of her.
Let's not get too esoteric about all of this. I mean, we've been talking about all of these grand themes of Alfred Hitchcock, and granted, I think there is no filmmaker who's more deliberate than Alfred Hitchcock in planting these themes. But ultimately, even though his films are about accepting responsibility, as I've said, at least that's what they mean to me, at the bottom line, for me, as I watch the films, they're about my lack of responsibility. That is, I'm handing myself over to Alfred Hitchcock and letting him manipulate me, and that's why I'm entertained by these movies.
Well, when you see a Hitchcock movie, you also learn about yourself. He was a keen observer of the human condition. He knew what our secret fears were, and he knew how to manipulate those. Well,
let me just say with it, he's got one great line, I think, that summarizes Alfred Hitchcock, and that is, you know, most movies are slices of life. My movies are pieces of cake.
Hitchcock said it. It's a great line. Now, of all the stars who were lucky to have worked with Alfred Hitchcock, none personified the Hitchcock hero better than Jimmy Stewart. He was the ordinary man, thrust into extraordinary situations which call for a particular type of reaction. Neil spoke with Stewart about Stewart's impressions when he first met Alfred Hitchcock.
Well, my first impression was that he didn't look like a movie director at all. I didn't, you know, you sort of form the sort of your impression of the movie director, C.B. DeMille, sort of that's what I did. Well, Hitchcock didn't convey that at all, but over the years I got to feel that you don't have to convey that in order to be a director.
What was Hitchcock like on the set?
Well, the first thing he does when you, sort of in the morning, if you're there early, when the crew just gets there and everything, he gets Bob Burke. Now, Bob Burke was his cameraman for a long time. I've never seen Hitchcock look through a camera. In other words, look through the viewer of a camera. He would do this. and Bob Burks would get back here and look. And that was what Bob Burks was to include in the scene, in the view of the camera, for the scene coming up. And Hitchcock will go and sit down and wait to be called when Bob Burks was ready.
When Hitchcock discussed a role with you, what did he talk about?
Well, he says, how do you feel? And I'd say, fine. And he said, are you going to be at Chasen's next Thursday? And what are you going to have for dinner? And I said, I'm not sure. And he said, he tells me, because he always knew what he was going to have, he asked me about Gloria and the kids. And he said, I'll see you on the set.
Alfred Hitchcock once said, actors are cattle. Did you ever feel that attitude from him?
He said, I am accused of saying that actors are cattle. And that's untrue. I've never said that. What I said was that actors should be treated as cattle.
That's our special salute to the genius of Sir Alfred Hitchcock. Until next time, save us the aisle seats.